I never asked for mysteries in my life. I always thought my story was simple, predictable even. I worked hard, paid my bills on time, tried to be the kind of father my children could look up to, and the kind of husband who held his home steady. My parents were aging but warm. My sister visited often enough to keep bonds alive, and the world seemed stable in its quiet, familiar rhythm. But that Thursday, that evening when rain tapped against my study window like impatient fingers, that was the night something shifted. A subtle fracture at first, like the faint crack in an old wall. But I felt it, I knew it. Something old and buried was about to drag itself back into the light. The phone rang only once. It was not the kind of ring that startles, it was quiet, almost gentle, as though whoever was calling understood the weight of what they were about to do. I remember glancing at the caller ID and seeing nothing but an unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something intuition, fate, or maybe just the kind of curiosity that gets men into trouble made me pick up. The voice on the other end did not sound rushed. It was calm, steady, as though its owner had rehearsed every word, and then came the name. A name I had not heard spoken out loud since I was a child. A name that existed only in the lost corners of my memory, tucked away with broken toys and old scars. A name I believed I had imagined, but I hadn't. It had been reland. Someone else remembered it too. I sat there, frozen, one hand gripping the arm of my chair, the other trembling slightly around the phone. The air felt different, somehow heavier, sharper. My study, normally a place of quiet retreat, seemed to close in around me. The bookshelves loomed like silent witnesses. The framed photographs of smiling faces suddenly felt staged. Artificial, too perfect, like props arranged to hide what they didn't want me to see. The voice kept speaking, slow and careful. Every sentence was a thread pulling at the seams of my life. And as I listened, my chest tightened, not from fear exactly, but from a dawning realization that my past was not the place I believed it to be. I had trusted it. I had built my identity on it. Yet beneath it, something had been buried, not by strangers or distant acquaintances, but by the very people who had raised me, laughed with me, hugged me when I cried. Family, I always believed, is a foundation, a home, a circle of trust. But now it felt like quicksand, solid enough to stand on until you realize it's been swallowing you slowly for years. I thought about my mother's eyes, how they always held a flicker of something. I never quite understood when certain topics appeared. I thought of my father's silence whenever I asked about distant relatives. I remembered my sister's tense smile whenever I mentioned childhood memories that didn't quite fit right, like puzzle pieces forced together. All these moments, once overlooked, now stood in a new light. The truth had been there all along, hiding in the spaces between words. Secrets, I learned, are alive. They breathe, they listen, they wait. And when they finally emerge, they don't come quietly, they tear open years of trust and history in one violent motion. That name spoken over the phone was not just a memory, it was a key. And once a key exists, you cannot pretend the door does not. When the call ended, I didn't move. I sat there listening to the rain, feeling its rhythm match the pounding in my chest. The house felt different, as though the walls themselves were aware of what had happened. I realized that everything I thought I knew about who I was and where I came from had been shaped by hands that had chosen to hide something from me. And the question that rose in me was not just why they hid it, but what they were so afraid of. I stood up and walked slowly to the window, watching the street glisten under the rain. I thought of every moment of my life that now seemed incomplete. And right then, in that quiet, charged stillness, I made a vow out of anger, though there was plenty of that simmering beneath my ribs, but out of necessity. A need that felt older than me. I would uncover the truth, no matter how deep it had been buried, no matter who it hurt, no matter what it changed, because once a lie cracks, the truth does not politely wait, it demands to be known. I carried my life like a man carries a familiar coat, comfortable, worn in the right places, something I believed fit me perfectly. I never questioned the seams or the stitching. I never held it up to the light to see what might have been concealed under layers of fabric. I simply wore it and called it mine to anyone looking in from the outside. We were what people called a good family. We took Sunday walks after church. We sent Christmas cards with coordinated sweaters. And we hosted backyard barbecues for neighbors who thought we were as wholesome as the golden cornfields surrounding our small Midwestern town. The sky always seemed wide there, open enough to carry every good thing a person could hope for. And I believed, with the trust of a child and the stubborn certainty of a grown man, that my family had given me the life that sky promised. My parents were gentle in the way that soft rain falls, sometimes steady, sometimes absent, but never violent. My mother had a habit of humming old songs when she cooked, and my father had the quiet dignity of a man who believed that listening was more important than speaking. My sister Emily was the one who laughed loud enough to fill rooms, who carried sunlight in her presence even when storms gathered. We were close, or so I believed. Close in that easy, unspoken way people are when they share holidays and hand-me-down memories. But comfort is a strange thing. It can lull you, wrap itself around you like a warm blanket, and in doing so, blind you completely. Looking back, I realized there were shadows that never left our home. They lingered behind smiles, behind the photographs that lined the hallway walls. The pictures were always cheerful, always tidy, as though life itself had learned to pose. Yet sometimes, in the quiet moments those times, when the house fell still after dinner and the lights were low, would sense something else there, something unsaid. My childhood memories were full of these half-noticed moments. I remember walking into the living room once to find my parents speaking in hushed voices, words sharp and urgent, only to have them snap into bright expressions when they noticed me. I remember birthdays where my mother's smile seemed forced at the edges, her eyes distant even as she cut the cake. I remember Emily's strange silences, her habit of changing the subject whenever conversations drifted toward the past, especially anything involving when we were very young. But children are trained by nature, by innocence, to accept the surface as the truth. And adults, if they are not careful, carry that training with them for years. So I believed the narrative given to me. I believed we were happy. I believed we were whole. I believed that every family had their odd spaces, their unspoken histories, their awkward pauses. I believed it was all normal. I believed I had been blessed with stability when others weren't. So lucky, my life moved forward simply, steadily. I found work that suited me, not extraordinary, not remarkable, but steady enough to pay the mortgage and the college tuition and the occasional vacation up north. I built habits and routines, waking early, reading in the evenings, calling my parents every Sunday, as though those conversations were pillars holding up the roof of my identity. I didn't realize those conversations were scripted, that the warmth was not free-flowing but carefully measured, that the life I believed I had was one built on conditions, spoken and unspoken. I didn't know that the trust I offered so freely was a kind of currency, one they spent quietly, fearing the day I might look too closely. Emily was perhaps the only one who ever revealed cracks. Sometimes she would look at me with a kind of sadness I didn't understand, like someone watching a man sleep while the house burned slowly around him. And I mistook that sadness for nostalgia, for tenderness, for whatever siblings feel when remembering childhood. Now I know better. She was watching me believe a story she had long since stopped believing herself. She knew there was a truth hiding under the surface. She knew our family wasn't built on simple love, but on a pact of silence. And that silence was heavier than any of us admitted. Lived decades in that silence, willingly, comfortably, like a man who sleeps under a quilt while a storm is gathering outside, unaware the roof is missing just a few nails. The tragedy of living a lie is not realizing it's a lie, not until something breaks it open, and once it breaks, there is no going back, no returning to the soft warmth of ignorance, no reclaiming the innocence of a life, unquestioned. That phone call, just a voice, just a name, was the crack that split everything open, and suddenly, the comfort I once trusted felt like chains. The rain that night didn't fall, it poured, as though the sky had finally grown tired of holding back its grief. The windows wept with it, streaks of water racing each other down the glass, like something desperate trying to get inside. I remember sitting there in my worn armchair, the one with the frayed armrest my wife used to tease me about, a glass of whiskey warming slowly in my hand. It was supposed to be one of those evenings where the world drifts quiet, where thoughts settle peacefully and the body unwinds from the long grind of the day. But peace has a way of vanishing in an instant, like breath on cold glass. My phone buzzed once. A simple vibration, a small interruption. At first, I didn't even look. Unknown numbers rarely bring good news, usually telemarketers, surveys, or wrong dials. I could have let it ring out. I should have let it ring out. But some quiet tug inside my chest made me reach for it. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps instinct, perhaps fate leaning in with a whisper. John Marston, the voice said when I answered. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just a calm familiarity that made my skin tighten. It wasn't the voice of a stranger trying to sell something or collect a debt. It sounded like someone who already knew me, someone who had rehearsed the moment of saying my name. Yes, I said, my tone cautious. Who is this? A breath on the line. Not a nervous breath, no. This was someone steady, composed. Someone who understood the weight of what they were about to say. You don't know me, the voice continued, but I know the truth about your family, and I think it's time you knew it too. My first instinct was disbelief, confusion, that sharp, sudden spike of adrenaline when reality shifts just slightly off its axis. I straightened in my chair without realizing it, the whiskey turning to something bitter on my tongue. The rain outside seemed to hush for a moment, as though even the storm leaned closer. What are you talking about? I asked. The words came out rough, scraped from the inside of my throat. The voice didn't falter. Your life isn't what you think it is. Your parents, your sister, they've kept something from you. Something they decided you didn't need to know. But it's time. There are sentences that change a life when spoken, and this was one of them. My heart didn't beat, it stumbled. A coldness spread from somewhere behind my ribs. The air felt too thick, like breathing through wool. I asked again, demanded this time, who are you? But instead of answering, the caller said a name I had not heard in decades. A name buried in the forgotten rooms of childhood memory. A name that rose up like a ghost stepping into the doorway, as real as breath. I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. The name lingered in the air between us, heavy and alive. I felt something shift inside me. Old walls tremble. A locked door in my memory rattled violently against its hinges. The voice went on, giving me fragments, edges of a story, but not the core. Hints that someone who should have been part of my life, someone who was part of my life, had been erased. Not lost, not dead, but deliberately removed. Cut away like a stitch someone didn't want visible. I heard the words, but my mind worked slower than usual, as though trudging through thick mud. My mother's forced smiles flickered through my mind. My father's silence whenever the past came up. Emily's quiet sadness I never understood. They all made sense now, not perfectly, but ominously. Like puzzle pieces, beginning to reveal an image I wasn't ready to see. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. The caller paused. And in that pause, I could hear the storm outside pounding the earth. The house creaking as though it too braced for impact. Because, the voice said, softer now, "You deserve to know who you are." And then the line went dead. No dramatic goodbye. No warning. Just silence. I sat there for a long time with the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the quiet hum of emptiness. The whiskey glass sat untouched on the small table. My hand trembled, but the rest of me felt frozen, cemented in place as though the world had narrowed down to that single moment. When I finally stood, my body felt foreign, stiff, like I had aged 20 years in those few minutes. That night, I did not sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while rain tapped relentlessly at the windows. The world outside drowning while my mind flooded with memories, old birthdays, conversations cut short, glances exchanged between my parents when they thought I wasn't looking. Every memory I had suddenly felt like a room I needed to re-enter, examine, question. Every laugh had an echo I had ignored. Every hug carried the shadow of something withheld. And somewhere in the dark, with the storm rolling on and sleep refusing to come, a single thought rose clearer than all the rest. If the foundation of your life is a lie, then every step you've taken rests on broken ground, and I realized I had been walking on cracks for years. The truth was out there now, calling for me, pulling me forward, and there was no returning to the life I had before that phone rang. I woke the next morning with the rain gone, but the heaviness still clinging to the air, as though the world knew something inside me had shifted and was waiting to see what I would do. The phone call played in my mind over and over, the voice lingering like smoke in a room long after the fire had gone out. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the edges of my memories. Something I had seen once, but had never truly understood. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that life as I had known it was already over. The only thing left was to confront whatever truth had been hiding in the shadows all these years. I didn't start with confrontation. Not yet. I knew better than that. When the ground beneath your feet begins to crack, you don't start shouting at the sky, you start looking for the fault line. The first thing I did was go to the attic. It had always been a place of dust and forgotten seasons, where old holiday decorations and boxes of childhood drawings sat untouched. I remember climbing the stairs slowly, hearing the wood groan under my weight. The single bulb flickered when I pulled the chain, casting a pale and fragile light across shapes covered in sheets like ghosts waiting to be acknowledged. I began opening boxes one by one, not searching for anything in particular, just waiting for the past to speak, and it did, but not in neat revelations, not in sudden bursts of clarity. It spoke in fragments. Photograph of my mother holding a child, but the child didn't look quite like me or Emily. There was something different in the shape of the jaw, the tilt of the eyes. Beneath the photo was a handwritten date, and the year did not match anything I remembered happening. A small detail, perhaps, but small details can be tectonic. A letter addressed to my father from someone named Clara. The handwriting was delicate, the kind of script that belongs to someone who grew up writing long letters in summer sunlight. The message inside was brief, affectionate, and filled with a tone of familiarity I had never associated with my father. And halfway through the letter came a sentence that stopped me cold. "Thank you for keeping our promise." Our promise. I read that line so many times the ink began to blur in my vision. Then there were financial statements, receipts, transfers, documents that mentioned names I did not know. One in particular appeared again and again, a single name that matched the one spoken on the phone. It was there, tucked between normal expenses and taxes, almost invisible, almost the truth had always been hiding in plain sight. The house I had grown up in suddenly felt claustrophobic. The air too thick, the walls too close. It was strange how familiar memories could turn foreign in an instant. I found myself studying the wallpaper pattern, the creak of the stairs, the worn handprints on the banister knot, with nostalgia but with suspicion. Like everything around me had been part of a carefully curated display. I drove to my childhood home next. My parents had moved years ago, but the house remained, owned by another family now. I asked to walk through, claiming I had grown up there, and the new owners, kind and unaware of the storm inside me, allowed it. Stepping inside felt like stepping into a memory that no longer welcomed me. The rooms were the same shape, but the furniture was different. The colors changed. And yet, beneath those changes, something familiar pulsed like a faint heartbeat. I stood in my old bedroom and felt the weight of every night I had slept there, dreaming the dreams of a child who believed the world was whole and safe. I pressed my hand against the wall, as if I could feel something beating on the other side. Secrets lived there once. I could feel them in the silence. When I spoke to Emily, she refused to meet my eyes. Her hands shook when I mentioned the name from the phone call, the name from the documents. She said she didn't know anything. But people reveal more in what they avoid than in what they say. Emily kept her gaze fixed on the floor, her jaw tight, her breathing shallow. And every piece of her screamed that she was carrying a truth too heavy to speak. My mother reacted differently. She smiled too quickly, too brightly, as though the truth could be drowned under practiced warmth. She asked me why I was digging up old memories, why I was bothering with things that didn't matter anymore. Her voice trembled only once, barely perceptible, when she said that last part. Didn't matter anymore. My father, he didn't say much at all. He just looked at me with eyes that had seen too many winters, eyes tired in a way I had never understood before. There was sorrow there. Not guilt, not fear, sorrow. And sorrow is its own confession. Every conversation only fueled me further. Every look away, every half-formed sentence. Every silence confirmed what I already knew. The truth was real, it was alive, it had been buried intentionally, and the closer I came to it, the more the weight of it pressed against my chest, heavy enough to make breathing feel like work. But I couldn't stop, not now. not when the edges of the truth were finally taking shape. I had spent 52 years living inside a story written for me, crafted carefully, maintained with effort. And now, the pages were beginning to tear. There is something terrifying and exhilarating about discovering that your life has been built on something false. It breaks you open. It remakes you. It strips you of certainty, but it gives you purpose. Find what was taken, name what was hidden, look into the dark, even if the dark looks back. And so I continued digging through papers, through memories, through silence, and every step forward felt both devastating and necessary. I was no longer just searching for answers. I was reclaiming myself. The revelation did not come with thunder or shouts or dramatic confrontation. It came in the quiet scrape of a drawer sliding open, in the dust that rose from papers untouched for decades, in the faint smell of old wood and time. I remember that moment with a clarity sharper than any memory I have ever held. The room was still, the air heavy, and I sat on the floor surrounded by the clutter of my own history stacks of letters, old documents, photographs that no longer felt familiar. My hands were tired, my eyes burning from nights of too little sleep, but something inside me refused to stop. Not when I was this close, not when the truth felt so near I could almost feel it breathing. The birth certificate was folded into a small rectangle, as though someone had once tried to make it disappear into the smallest possible space. It wasn't stored neatly. It wasn't labeled. It was hidden, not lost. There is a difference, significant one. Lost things want to be found. Hidden things are meant to stay buried. I unfolded it slowly, each crease opening like a door to a past I had never been allowed to see. The paper was yellowed around the edges, soft from age, and the ink had faded, but the words were still clear. The name struck me first. My name, not Emily's, not anyone I knew. It read, William Carter. The next lines were harder to read, my eyes refusing to trust what I saw. Place of birth, same hospital I had been born in. Birth year, my birth year. And then, in the line labeled father, there it was. My father's name, written clearly, unmistakably, undeniable. I stared at that name until it blurred. I blinked, wiped my face, not even realizing I had begun to cry. My father. The man who taught me how to tie my shoes, how to fix a leaky faucet, how to shake a man's hand with confidence. The man who sat at the dinner table every night as though the world had never held a single crack. He had another son. I had a brother who had existed my entire life, walking somewhere under the same sky, breathing the same air, yet entirely erased from my world. I don't know how long I sat there. Time didn't move normally in that moment. It stretched, twisted, curled around me like smoke. I thought of birthdays, family photos arranged neatly in albums, holiday gatherings, every moment in which the truth had been carefully, deliberately omitted. My parents had smiled through it all. They had watched me grow, watched me live, watched me trust them, and they had carried this secret like a stone held behind their backs. Betrayal is not just panic, is disorientation. It is the sudden realization that the map you've been using all your life was drawn by someone else, and that entire roads, entire cities, entire pieces of you were left out. I felt angry, and anger that did not flare, but simmered deep, heavy, molten. Not the kind that burns out quickly, the kind that reshapes landscapes. How could they? How could they love me and still do this? How could they look at me, year after year, knowing I had a brother I wasn't allowed to know existed. But beneath the anger was something else, something even stronger. A strange, aching grief. I grieved for a childhood that should have included him. I grieved for a brother I had never met. I grieved for all the years we had lived parallel lives, strangers by force, separated not by distance but by silence. I read the document again, and again, and again. I traced the name William Carter, with my fingertip as though touching the paper could make him real to me. Then came the determination. It did not roar. It did not shout. It arrived slowly, like dawn creeping across a dark horizon. I had to find him, not to fix anything, not to rewrite the past, not even to forgive, but simply to know. Because a life built on truth, even painful truth, is better than a life built on lies that pretend to protect you. I thought of every moment I had spent searching, every hour spent digging through the remnants of my family's carefully constructed story. All of it led here, to him, to William. Somewhere out there, there was a man who shared my blood, my history, my father. A man who had been given a different life, one that may have been harder, or lonelier, or perhaps even happier, but whatever it was taken from me. He was taken from me, and I would not let that be the end of the story. This wasn't just about anger anymore. It wasn't even just about betrayal. It was about identity, about truth, about reclaiming what had been stolen, not from my father, not from my mother, not even from Emily, but from me. I folded the birth certificate carefully, not hiding it this time, but holding it like something sacred. This was proof. The door had opened, and now I was stepping through. Finding William became not just a search, but a pilgrimage. A journey I didn't choose, but one I was pulled into as, though the truth itself had taken me by the collar and refused to let go. Once I had that birth certificate in my hands, once I saw his name printed beside my father's, the world I lived in changed shape. Every day became divided into before and after, before the truth, after the truth, and I could no longer stay in the before. At first, I tried simple steps, my computer, public records, archived directories, but the years had done their work well. William's trail was faint, scattered like ashes in the wind. There were hints of relocations, legal name changes, a foster placement, an adoption. Every document seemed to dissolve into another, faces blurred into unfamiliar ones, and every piece of information led nowhere solid. It was as if someone had not only hidden him, but carefully moved him through the world like a shadow no one was meant to notice. I hired a private investigator, a quiet man with eyes like someone who had seen 1,000 secrets and forgotten none of them. He listened to my story without judgment, only nodding occasionally while I spoke. He didn't ask why I wanted to. No, he understood instinctively that some truths are too heavy to explain. He simply said, "This will take time," and I found myself grateful he said nothing more. Time became strange as I searched. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. Seasons shifted outside my window while I sat inside rooms filled with paperwork and memory. I found myself dreaming of him, someone I had never known. Sometimes he was a small boy with dark hair, running just beyond my reach. Sometimes he was a shadow standing in the doorway, silent, waiting. Other times he looked just like me. The search led me into places I had not expected to go. Old county offices, libraries with dust layered so thick it seemed part of the furniture. Towns where the streets felt too quiet, where the people looked at me like they recognized something in me but couldn't place it. I followed addresses that no longer existed, telephone numbers that had been disconnected years ago, school records sealed by court order. I began to understand just how thoroughly someone had wanted him removed from my life, and still, somewhere inside, I felt him. A brother, not by experience, not by memory, but by blood. There is something primal about that connection, something ancient that moves below thought. It pulls, it calls, it knows. The breakthrough came unexpectedly in the form of a name scribbled on the back of an old church registry. A small rural congregation in Ohio, one of those towns you find only by accident where the grocery store is also the post office, and the diner doubles as the town hall. The name didn't stand out at first, lost among handwritten notes and fading ink. But when I saw it again this time in a volunteer list for a community center, I felt something inside me go still. William Carter, age 50-2, working part-time as a mechanic, living alone, a life quiet enough that the world barely noticed him. The investigator confirmed it. The records aligned. The details fit like teeth in a lock. I remember the drive to Ohio, endless highway, trees blurring into one another. The radio turned off because words felt like too much. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. With every mile, I felt the weight of years pressing against my chest. What would I say? How does a man explain that his existence has been shared with someone who was kept invisible? How do you ask a stranger to make space for a connection they never asked for? I didn't know. I only knew I had to go. I found him in a small auto shop behind a row of houses, the kind of place where time moves more slowly. The smell of oil and metal hung in the air. The door was open, and he was there, back turned to me, working on an engine, hands steady, movements familiar in a way that made my throat tighten. He looked like me, not a replica. Not a reflection, but like someone who shared the same origin, the same starting point, the same map drawn into the lines of his face. A jaw shaped like mine, shoulders like mine, eyes that had the same seriousness, the same quiet intensity, as though the world had always been something to endure, not simply inhabit. I stood there, unable to speak at first. He wiped his hands with a cloth, then turned, and for a moment the world held its breath. We stared at each other not as strangers, not as acquaintances, but as two men who had been unknowingly orbiting the same truth for half a century. I introduced myself carefully, not claiming anything, not demanding anything, just offering the first thread. "My name is John," I said. My voice sounded far away. I think we might be connected." Suspicion flickered in his eyes first. Of course it did. A lifetime of unanswered questions lives in the bones. But he didn't walk away. He didn't shut the door. He listened. We talked for hours, slowly, cautiously, like men carrying something fragile between them. I told him about the birth certificate, about what little I knew. He told me fragments of his life, bits of memory, pieces of understanding that had never quite fit together for him either. Then came the moment neither of us named out loud, but both felt recognition, not the recognition of familiarity, the recognition of belonging. It was not dramatic. There were no tears, no sudden collapse into brotherly embrace. It was quieter than that, deeper, a gentle shift in the world, like a key finally turning in a long-locked door. He existed. He was real. He had always been real, and for the first time, I understood what had truly been taken from me. Not just knowledge, connection, history, family, missing part of myself I had never known to mourn in that small, oil-scented workshop surrounded by tools and the steady ticking of cooling metal. I found something that had been hidden from me for 52 years. My brother. Confronting my parents was like walking back into a house you thought you knew, only to discover secret rooms behind the walls. Even before I stepped through their front door, I felt the weight of what I carried. It was not just a story, not just information. It was the proof of a life they had attempted to fold away, to tuck into a hidden drawer and pretend never existed. And now I was the one opening that drawer, spilling its contents across the table. The house was quiet when I arrived. Too quiet. The sort of quiet that has bones in it. My mother was in the living room, folding laundry in neat stacks that looked like they belonged in another world. A world that believed everything stayed the same. My father sat in his usual chair, a mug of coffee cooling untouched in his hands. I remember thinking how ordinary it looked, how painfully normal, as though the truth I had uncovered wasn't ready to tear through the ceiling. When I sat down across from them, the room seemed smaller than I remembered, as if the walls had moved closer over the years. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just watched them, these two people who had shaped me, taught me to tie my shoes, taught me to speak, taught me how to be in the world. And then, I thought of William, of the life he lived while I lived mine, separate like two branches, split from the same trunk. Something inside me cracked. I found him, I said. The words were quiet, but they broke the room in half. My mother's hands froze mid-fold. The cloth slipped from her fingers like something had gone numb inside her. My father didn't look confused. He didn't even look surprised. That was what struck me. He looked tired, as if he had been bracing for this moment every day for 50 years, and the moment had finally arrived. Why? I asked. The word lived in my chest like a wound. Why did you hide him from me all these years? Why keep him a secret? Why erase him? My voice was shaking, not from weakness, but from everything held inside me too long. The betrayal, the years of not knowing, the unspoken sense that something had always been missing, like a door inside myself that led nowhere. My mother's eyes filled. Tears gathered slowly, heavy, the way storms begin. She didn't speak at first. She looked at my father, and for a long moment they said everything in silence. The kind of silence that has history in it. When they finally spoke, it came out halting, uneven, like trying to walk on a leg that had long since broken and healed wrong. They told me about fear, about shame, about the mistake that led to William's birth, about family pressure, about whispered judgment that would have followed them in church hallways and grocery store aisles. They said they wanted to protect me, to give me a childhood free from the shadow of scandal. They convinced themselves it was kinder, cleaner, easier, but their words felt thin, like tissue paper barely covering something jagged beneath. They hadn't just hidden a mistake, they had hidden a person. They had hidden my brother. My father's voice cracked when he spoke. He said he regretted it, that not a day passed where he didn't think of the choice they made. But regret after the fact is a quiet thing, too quiet to undo damage that had lived for half a century. My mother reached for me. I didn't move. I wasn't ready. The space between us had changed shape. The ground we had always stood on together was broken now, uneven and sharp. I felt grief for them. for the young versions of them who made that choice in fear, for the weight they carried in silence, for the years that gnawed at them. But above that grief was something stronger, something clearer, a vow that I would not let William be hidden again. I would not allow him to be treated like a stain on a story. He was my brother. He was real. He was part of me. Of us, whether they liked it or not. The room stayed quiet for a long time after that. The laundry sat unfolded. The coffee stayed cold. No one looked at each other directly. The truth sat between us, large enough to take up its own chair. We were still a family, but not the same one we had been. There are truths that do not destroy you, but they change the shape of you forever. This was one of those truths, and now that I had found my brother, I was not letting him go. Healing did not come in a sudden wave or a dramatic moment of embrace. It came like slow dawn light creeping into a room that had been dark for too long, warming the edges before touching the center. When William and I began talking, it was with the cautious steps of two people who knew they were connected by blood but separated by history. There was no guidebook for this, no script to follow, no tradition to lean on. Just two men, both in their 50s, both carrying old wounds they had never known they had. Our first conversations were simple, almost tentative. We talked about childhood memories, the foods we liked, small stories from our pasts. But even those small exchanges felt huge, like uncovering pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered for years. I would listen to him describe birthdays celebrated in unfamiliar houses, quiet Christmas mornings, long drives with adoptive parents who loved him but never spoke about where he came from. And as I spoke about my own memories, I felt them shift in my mind, like furniture being rearranged in a familiar room to make space for something new. There were moments when silence settled between us, thick and heavy, full of things we couldn't yet say. Resentment hovered there, especially in the early days. William had lost a family he never knew he had. I had lost a brother I should have grown up beside. We had both been robbed in different ways. There was grief in that, a deep and complicated grief that felt like mourning something that never had a chance to exist. But the more we talked, the more the bitterness softened. Not because we pretended it wasn't there, but because we honored it. We let it speak. We acknowledged the shape of it inside us. And in doing so, we made room for something else to grow. We began to laugh together. The first time it happened, it startled me. We were sitting outside on a crisp afternoon, watching leaves fall in slow spirals from tall trees. William was telling me about how he once tried to fix a broken faucet in his kitchen and ended up flooding the entire room because he forgot to shut off the water valve. The way he told it, with quiet humor and just the right amount of embarrassment, had me chuckling before I even realized it. Then he laughed, and the sound of it felt familiar, like I had heard it in another life. Maybe I had, in the small inherited similarities that genetics weave into the bones of a family. The laughter didn't erase the pain, but it sat beside it, proving that both could exist at the same time. I started keeping notes, not because I wanted to analyze what was happening, but because I wanted to remember it. I wrote about our conversations in a worn leather journal I found in an old desk drawer. I wrote about how William leaned forward when he was curious, how he paused before speaking when he wanted to choose his words carefully, how he would smile in this subtle, almost shy way when something touched him deeply. I wrote because I wanted these moments to live longer than we would. We began taking photographs, not posed ones. Not the kind where you stand stiffly, shoulder to shoulder, and force a smile. These were quiet photos, William reading a newspaper, me brewing coffee, the two of us walking down an old street, shadows stretching ahead of us. I printed them and kept them in a small box, labeling each with a date. Not because I was sentimental, though perhaps I was, but because these were the pieces of our story no one had allowed us to have when we were children. With time, I realized that the truth had done more than expose old pain. It had given us a chance to reclaim something. The secret had kept us apart, but the truth was drawing us closer. Not quickly, not perfectly, but sincerely. I began to understand that healing is not the erasing of wounds. It is learning how to live with them in a way that lets life continue to move, to breathe, to grow. The scars of what happened would remain in my parents, in my sister, in William, in me. But scars are proof of survival, not defeat. I started gathering everything together, building a record not just of what had happened, but of how we were rebuilding from it. Letters exchanged, conversations remembered, pictures, small objects with newly shared meaning. I thought of grandchildren, of future nieces and nephews, of generations who deserved clarity rather than silence. I did not want history to repeat itself in my family. I wanted the truth to live in daylight. I wanted no one to feel erased, hidden, or forgotten. William and I did not become best friends overnight, but we became brothers. Slowly, honestly, openly. And that, I realized, was the real victory. Not uncovering the secret, not exposing the lie, but choosing what to do. After the truth was brought into the light, we chose connection. We chose presence. We chose to build a family where none had been allowed to before, and that was worth everything it cost to find the truth. Justice, I learned, is not always loud. It doesn't always come with raised voices or slammed doors, or the sharp recoil of anger looking for a place to land. In the earliest days after uncovering the truth, my blood felt hot with betrayal, and every thought burned with the question of what my life might have been if I had known about William sooner. I wanted to accuse, to demand apologies, to make my parents feel the hurt I had felt. That desire was real and heavy, and it crawled inside me like something alive. But grief has a way of settling the longer you sit with it, and when I sat with mine, when I really allowed myself to feel everything, I discovered something I did not expect. Revenge wouldn't give me back the years. It wouldn't restore the childhood I didn't share with my brother. It wouldn't heal him, or me, or the hollow space that had formed in both of us long ago. It would only harden what was already scarred. I realized that revenge would be another kind of silence, another secret, another wound passed down instead of repaired. And I had already lived in the shadow of enough of those, so I chose differently the next time I visited my parents. I didn't go to accuse. I went to speak the truth of what happened, not the truth told in whispers or in fear, but the full truth, courageously spoken. I told them that what they had done had harmed me, had harmed William, had shaped the fabric of our lives in ways they could never undo. I did not sugarcoat the pain, nor did I hide the anger. I laid it down in front of them gently, steadily. The way one sets down something fragile, something that has weight but must be handled with care. My father listened without interrupting. His hands trembled. My mother cried quietly, her chest rising with each painful breath. They did not defend themselves. They did not make excuses. They seemed, in that moment, older than I had ever seen them, smaller somehow, as if the truth itself had taken something from them too. I realized then that they had lived with this secret like a stone in their ribs, pressing on them with every passing year. It had not been a clean hiding. It had been a wound that never healed. And though I could not forgive them instantly, I could see their regret in the lines of their faces, in the way their eyes held mine without looking away. Justice, I realized, was not about vengeance. Justice was about acknowledgement. It was about refusing to continue the silence. It was about choosing to break the cycle. So I did not sever ties. I did not storm out. I did not declare myself done. Instead, I told them that the story of our family was changing now, that the truth would be spoken openly, that William was no longer a secret, no longer a hidden branch cut from the tree and left to wither alone. He was family, and he deserved to be seen, heard, remembered. I told them they could choose to be part of this future or step aside, but the truth would stand either way. In the weeks that followed, I watched my parents begin the painful, slow work of facing what they had done. My father reached out to William first, unsure and unsteady. My mother followed later, carrying decades of guilt with her. Their conversations weren't easy. There were apologies. There were tears. There were long silences when none of them knew what to say. But there was effort. Effort mattered. Meanwhile, William and I continued to build something strong between Usam, something that felt like a bridge, wide enough for all of us to cross, if we chose to. I came to understand that justice can simply mean refusing to live in darkness anymore. It means letting the truth breathe, letting it exist without shame. It means opening doors instead of closing them. It means choosing healing over hurt, even when hurt feels easier. And in that choice, peace began to take shape. Not a sudden peace, not a perfect peace, but a quiet one. The kind that grows slowly, like grass returning to a burned field. I found that the truest justice was never revenge. It was reclamation. It was standing tall in the full light of truth, saying, "This is who we are, this is what happened, and this is where we go from here." And finally, I could breathe. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest edges, though the marks they leave behind never fully disappear. When I look back now, I see my life not as a clean timeline, but as a tapestry of moments stitched together by choices, silences, and the things we believed we were protecting. I used to think of truth as something bright and simple, something you hold up to the light like glass. But truth is not glass. It is stone. It is weight. It is something that shapes us, whether we acknowledge it or not. For so many years, I lived in a story that had been edited before I even learned to speak. I walked hallways in my childhood home where conversations ended the moment I entered. I saw photographs where a figure should have been but was not. I learned to accept incomplete answers because I believed they were complete enough. I loved my parents. I trusted them, and trust can make silence look like peace, even when it is something else entirely. But truth, no matter how deeply buried, does not die. It waits. It lingers in quiet moments, in instincts we cannot explain, in faces we feel we have seen somewhere before. It lives in the way your chest tightens when you hear a name. It lives in the way your mind returns to a memory you can't place. When the phone call came that night, the truth did not arrive suddenly. It simply rose to the surface at last. I spent years thinking my story was already written. Then I discovered that there had been pages torn out. And I realized that the story of our lives is something we must sometimes reclaim, not rewrite, but restore. The lesson I want to share is not one of simple forgiveness or blame. Life is never that neat. People hide things because they are afraid. afraid of judgment, afraid of loss, afraid of being seen for who they truly are. Fear can bend love into strange shapes, and sometimes those shapes look like protection. Other times they look like betrayal. But we cannot build a life on what is hidden. A family cannot grow where truth is not allowed to breathe. Silence is not safety. Silence is a slow erosion, wearing away connection grain by grain. I know now that honesty is not always gentle. It can scrape and tear. It can pull apart foundations we thought were solid. Yet honesty is the only thing that can make room for healing. When William and I met, we did not find instant peace. We found confusion. We found anger. We found grief, heavy and unfamiliar. But beneath all of that, we found recognition. The kind that does not require explanation. The kind that lives deep in the blood and bone. We found a shared beginning, fractured though it was. We did not rebuild what was lost. We built something new. Our connection did not replace the years we missed. It simply gave meaning to the years ahead. And that, I discovered, is what healing truly looks like. It is not about erasing pain. It is about weaving it into a larger pattern. One where joy and sorrow sit beside each other, neither overshadowing the other. If there is one truth I now carry, it is this: we are not defined by the secrets that were kept from us. We are defined by what we choose to do once we learn them. We can turn inward, let bitterness take root, let the past harden in us like stone. Or we can open our hands and allow something new to grow in the space where pain once lived. I chose to uncover the truth, not to destroy, but to restore. I chose to face what was hidden so the next generation would not have to. I chose to bring William into my life and stand beside him, not as strangers, not as shadows, but as brothers. And through that choice, I found a kind of peace that feels earned, grounded. Real. The truth did not break me. The silence almost did. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: do not turn away from what hurts to look at. Do not allow fear to decide what is spoken and what is buried. Ask the difficult questions. Seek the hidden chapters. Speak your own truth before it becomes a shadow inside you. Because sometimes the most painful revelations are not the end of the story at all. They are the beginning of finally living it.